World of Warcraft Chronicle, Volume 1, Chapter 3, Ancient Kalimdor. The Empire of Zul and the Awakening of the Aqir. 16,000 years before the Dark Portal. For generation after generation, life bloomed across the ordered world of Azeroth. Nowhere was this more evident than in the dense woodlands around the Well of Eternity. The font of Azeroth's arcane lifeblood accelerated the cycles of growth and rebirth. Before long, sentient beings evolved from the land's primitive life forms. Among the first and most prolific were the trolls, a race of savage hunter-gatherers who flourished in Azeroth's jungles and forests. Though the trolls were of only average intelligence, they possessed incredible agility and strength. Their unique physiology also allowed them to recover from physical injuries at an astonishing rate, and they could even regenerate lost limbs over time. The early trolls developed a wide array of superstitious customs. Some practiced cannibalism and devoted themselves to warfare. A rare few sought knowledge through mystical practices and meditation. Still others honed their ties to a dark and powerful form of magic known as voodoo. Yet no matter their individual customs, what all trolls shared was a common religion that revolved around Kalimdor's elusive wild gods. The trolls called these powerful beings Loa, and they worshipped them as deities. Due to their reverence for the wild gods, the trolls gathered near a series of peaks and plateaus in southern Kalimdor. This was home to many of their honored Loa. The trolls gave the holy mountain range the name Zandalari, and soon they built small encampments upon its slopes. The most powerful group of trolls was called the Zandalari tribe. Its members claimed nearly all of Zandalari's tallest plateaus, believing them to be sacred ground. Atop the highest peaks, they constructed a small cluster of crude shrines. In time, these grew into a bustling temple city known as Zin-Azshari. Over the next several centuries, other tribes arose to challenge the Zandalari for territory and power. The most notable of these were the fearsome Gurubashi, Amani, and Drakari. The Gurubashi and Amani in particular laid claim to enormous swaths of land in Kalimdor's lush jungles and woods. On occasion, tribes clashed, often over hunting grounds. Yet major conflicts were few and rarely lengthy. Trolls were such skilled and fierce fighters that any real conflict would cost both sides dearly. Untouched land was plentiful in all directions, and the various tribes quickly learned it was wiser to resettle than risk war. Only one place was forbidden by the tribe's witch doctors and priests: a small mound of blackened stone at the base of the Zandalari Mountains. The Loa warned the tribe's mystics of severe consequences should they disturb the black stones. For many years, none of the trolls dared disobey, but curiosity eventually won out. A group of rebellious trolls plumbed the forbidden mound. They discovered that the black stones were not mere rocks, they were the jagged hide of a monstrous creature. None of the trolls had ever seen anything like it. They believed it to be an undiscovered Loa, and a powerful one at that, considering that the other spirits were frightened of it. The trolls performed vile rituals and living sacrifices to awaken the slumbering monstrosity. Roused by the blood offerings, a gigantic 𝒂💒 general emerged from its long slumber and ruthlessly slaughtered all those who had revived it. The trolls were unaware that this was 𝒂💒, the being who had survived the encounter with Keeper Tyr. Gravely wounded, the 𝒂💒 had fled southwest to what would be known as the Zandalari Mountains before collapsing into a deep hibernation. Reeling from its presence, the ancient Loa inhabiting the area had buried 𝒂💒 beneath the earth so that no other creature would disturb it. The awoken 𝒂💒 looked upon troll civilization with contempt, for it was but a pale shadow of the Black Empire of eons past. 𝒂💒 knew it would delight the old gods to see this pitiful civilization rent to ashes. The 𝒂💒 reached out with its mind and found a race of creatures it could control, the Aqir. In the ages after the fall of the Black Empire, these insectoids had remained hidden in small warrens and tunnels beneath the ground. 𝒂💒 rallied the Aqiri swarms, driving them to make war and establish their dominance over Azeroth once again. As the 𝒂💒 expanded its power and recovered, the insectoids began building a vast subterranean empire known as Azshara. 𝒂💒 patiently watched and waited as the Aqiri ranks swelled in number. When the time was right, the 𝒂💒 led the insectoids from their underground empire, and they swept across the land. The trolls' experience as hunters made them formidable foes, but the Aqiri threat was unlike any they had ever faced. Numerous smaller tribes fell before the unrelenting insectoids' legions. As the Aqir encroached perilously close to the Zandalari Mountains, the Zandalari moved to act. They united the disparate troll tribes into a single mighty force, which they called the Empire of Zul. The members of this newly forged society would put aside their differences and work together to destroy the Aqir. The Zandalari took on the role of commanding the troll armies. With their temple city looming high in the mountains, they could detect enemy movements and direct attacks at weak points. Under the Zandalari's guidance, the other trolls used ambush tactics in the surrounding jungles to whittle down the enemy's numbers. Elsewhere, revered priests summoned the Loa to assail their enemies. These ferocious wild gods joined the troll warriors in battle, ripping through the Aqiri ranks and even wounding 𝒂💒. The Aqir were forced to retreat before they could mount a proper siege on the sacred mountains. 𝒂💒, gravely wounded by the Loa, fled to the northeast with a contingent of its closest Aqiri followers. There it planned to regain its strength while the insectoids continued their war against the trolls. Though they had driven the Aqir away, the Zandalari knew that their enemies still posed a grave threat. The insectoids, if left unchecked, would attack outlying troll territories. At the Zandalari's behest, the other tribes moved out to hunt down the Aqir. The trolls quickly learned it was not enough to simply kill the insectoids. If any Aqir escaped underground, they would establish a new colony and rise up again later. To permanently end the threat, no corner of the continent could be left unguarded. Thus, the Zandalari convinced the most power-hungry troll factions to establish new strongholds across Azeroth. Chief among these groups were the Amani, Gurubashi, and Drukhari. After defeating the Aqir, they could claim the fertile new lands for themselves without any competition. The ambitious tribes readily agreed. The Drukhari pushed into the frigid north against a colony of Aqir, but the trolls faced a weapon they had never expected: corrupted Tol'vir. A small group of the Titanforged who dwelled outside Ulduar had been captured and enthralled by the Aqir. these ferocious stone Tol'vir, known as Obsidian Destroyers, almost overpowered the Drukhari. But years of battle had shaped the tribe into cunning fighters, and they devised brilliant ways to topple and shatter their foes. The Gurubashi also encountered corrupted Titanforged. These trolls had ventured southwest, where the Aqir had overrun Ahn'Qiraj, the prison complex housing the old god Cthulhu. Upon infiltrating the stronghold, the insectoids had enslaved the Anub'sat giants who guarded the prison. Early engagements between the Gurubashi and the Aqir proved disastrous for the trolls. The insectoids and their mighty Anub'sats slaughtered several large Gurubashi encampments. Thereafter, the Zandalari instructed Gurubashi priests to separate their tribe into smaller, more mobile raiding groups instead of large armies. This new tactic allowed them to constantly harass the Aqir, bleeding the insectoid armies dry over a period of many years. Though they were never able to completely wipe out the Aqir, the Gurubashi eventually won uncontested control of the surrounding territory. Meanwhile, the Amani had set out to destroy Kithix. They tracked the Cathrax's trail far to the northeastern woodlands, cutting through an unending mass of Aqiri guardians. In a final savage battle, the entire tribe flung itself in a suicidal attack against Kithix and its remaining insectoid minions. Only a tiny fraction of the troll army survived. Even so, the Cathrax succumbed to its tireless hunters. Though the cost was high, the fearsome reputation of the Amani became legend among the other tribes. Atop the site where they had killed Kithix, the trolls established a new settlement. It would one day grow into a sprawling temple city known as Zul'Aman. With the Cathrax gone, the Aqir no longer fought with as much ferocity or purpose. The war between the trolls and the Aqir shifted dramatically. Extermination of the Aqir became the trolls' new imperative. After many centuries of brutal fighting, the trolls shattered the Aqir Empire, containing the insectoids in the far northern and far southern reaches of the continent. Central Kalimdor was permanently scoured of their presence. The surviving Aqir fortified their underground colonies against further troll aggression. They showed no more interest in fighting. In time, the trolls proclaimed themselves victorious. Without war to bind them together, the troll factions grew ever more distant and insular. The far-flung strongholds of the different tribes blossomed into vibrant homes, temple cities, and eventually empires in their own right. The Zandalari withdrew to their mountain plateaus to pursue spiritual knowledge, but they would always maintain an immense influence over the disparate troll societies. The Mantid Cycle. In the later stages of the war with the trolls, one enclave of Aqir gathered at the southern edge of Kalimdor. Below the roots of the great Kapiri trees, they established a new empire. The insectoids, known thereafter as the Mantid, saw no purpose in continuing a battle they knew they were not strong enough to win. Such restraint was unusual among the insectoids, but then so was the Mantid's reasoning. They still fervently worshipped the old gods, believing that their ancient masters would one day rise from their prisons and re-establish their dominion over Azeroth. The best way to serve the entities was not to expand the Mantid's strength, but to conserve it, refine it, and sharpen it. The Mantid would grow stronger without jeopardizing their survival. Though a revered empress ruled over the day-to-day activities of the Mantid, another group controlled the insectoid's destiny. The members of this group called themselves the Klaxi, meaning priest in their native tongue. They guided the actions of the Empress and the Mantid swarms in the hopes of preserving and strengthening the race. Rather than seek retribution on the trolls, the Klaxi turned their gaze on another enemy. Nearby dwelled the Mogu, mighty Titan-forged who had guarded the Veil of Eternal Blossoms for untold ages. The Mantid found themselves drawn to the mystical valley. They were not aware of it at the time, but they were attracted to the lingering presence of the slain old god Y'Shaarj, whose festering heart had been locked away beneath the veil by High Keeper Ra. To seek out the dark essence beneath the veil, the Mantid launched a surprise attack against the Mogu. The Titan-forged narrowly withstood the swarm and drove them back to the Kipri forests. The Klaxi did not consider their defeat a failure. The surviving Mantid warriors had matured, grown more powerful and cunning. The Klaxi patiently waited 100 years before assaulting the Mogu again. They dispatched a new generation of young Mantid to besiege the Titan-forged. Once again, the survivors returned stronger. Thus began the Mantid Cycle. Every century, a new Mantid clutch made war upon the Mogu. The ferocious battles removed the weak from the swarm, and only the strongest returned to the Kipri trees. Within only a few cycles, Mantid civilization had become tightly honed and rigid, utterly focused on eradicating weakness and empowering the mightiest of their kind. The Mogu marked the change with concern. They launched a campaign into the 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍 itself to ensure that the cycle would not come again. The attack came at an inauspicious time for the Mantid. It was decades before the next clutch of warriors would hatch. The Mantid were few, and the Mogu were many. Initially, the Titan-forged devastated the insectoid ranks, even the strongest survivors of past swarms. Only one Mantid, Corvin, emerged to turn the tide of battle. Armed with blades forged of Kipri amber, the warrior eviscerated the Mogu ranks, thwarting their attacks and sending them into retreat. So great was Corvin's skill that many Mantid came to believe that he was capable of cheating death itself. The high elders of the Klaxi proclaimed Corvin a paragon and promised his deeds would become legend among their kind. But the honored warrior was still not satisfied. He knew it was only chance that he arose in his race's greatest hour of need. He did not want to leave the Mantid's defense to chance alone. The Klaxi agreed and tasked him with finding a solution. After years of experimenting with Kipri sap, Corvin discovered that a living creature could be preserved within an amber cocoon, potentially for thousands of years. If the Klaxi placed their greatest warriors in these cocoons, they could be awakened whenever they were needed to avert disaster. Corvin became the first to undergo this preservation. In honor of his deeds, the Klaxi named him Corvin the Prime, the first of many paragons to come. As he lay undisturbed in his amber tomb, the great cycle he had almost single-handedly saved continued on, remaining unbroken for countless generations. The age of 100 kings, 15,000 years before the Dark Portal. Though High Keeper Ra had not been seen in millennia, his loyal Mogu maintained their vigil over the Veil of Eternal Blossoms, bravely fighting off each successive Mantid swarm. Their faith that the High Keeper would one day return endured through century after century of hardships. Yet that faith vanished once the curse of flesh manifested within the Mogu ranks. For the first time, the Mogu faced mortality. Fear and uncertainty took root in their hearts. Small disagreements spiraled into conflict, violence, and bloodshed. Packs of Mogu banded together. Clans and warlords emerged by the score and engaged in brutal power struggles. Those who triumphed were quickly toppled by rivals. Through it all, their culture and language, even their sense of purpose and identity, began to change. This period of turmoil and conflict became known as the Age of 100 Kings, and the Mogu edged perilously close to destroying themselves from within. Only their basest instincts prevented annihilation. At the beginning of each new Mantid swarm, the Mogu's petty conflicts would die down. The various clans would reluctantly band together to form against the Mantid. But once the swarm had retreated, internal hostilities would surface once again. As the Mogu battled the Mantid, a number of other races arose in the region. Many of these creatures were drawn to the latent powers emanating from the Veil of Eternal Blossoms. Among these wondrous new races were the Jinyu, fish-like mystics who dwelled in the rivers and lakes, a bold and mischievous race of monkeys known as the Hosen also came to inhabit the dense jungles that encircled much of the Vale. But by far the most intelligent of these newcomers were the wise Pandaren. The emergence of so much life around the Vale piqued the interest of 4 wild gods. Their names were Zuen, the white tiger, Yulon, the jade serpent, Chiji, the red crane, and Nizao, the black ox. Zuen and his fellow wild gods gathered at the Vale to watch over and guide the myriad life forms that dwelled in the area. Though the warlike activities of the Mogu often troubled them, the wild gods delighted in watching the other races flourish. In particular, Zuen and the other demigods developed close ties with the Pandaren, in large part due to their penchant for peace. The Pandaren considered the wild gods, whom they called the August Celestials, to be benevolent deities. They formed a system of worship devoted to the extraordinary beings. In return, the wild gods bestowed knowledge on the Pandaren, nurturing their ties to philosophy and the natural world. At the behest of the August Celestials, the Pandaren formed a culture that sought peace and harmony with the surrounding environment. Yet soon a new Mogu leader would arise to challenge these philosophies. His name was Lei Shen, and his rule would threaten not only the mortal races of the Vale, but the August Celestials as well. The Thunder King. 15,000 to 12,200 years before the Dark Portal. As the Pandaren and other races prospered around the Veil of Eternal Blossoms, the Mogu continued their endless squabbling. It was during this cycle of violence that a warrior named Lei Shen came to power. A descendant of a minor warlord, young Lei Shen was thoroughly accustomed to the brutality of clan warfare. Despite his skill and success in battle, he saw the incessant conflicts and political maneuvering as a betrayal of the Mogu's potential. Nevertheless, he remained stalwart as a vessel for his father. A close advisor eventually betrayed and murdered Lei Shen's father. Almost all of the fallen warlord's clansmen sought refuge in the ranks of other clans, abandoning Lei Shen. Only a few loyal armsmen refused to leave his side. Rather than seek retribution and perpetuate the violence, Lei Shen chose to go into exile. He wandered the land, meditating on what he saw as the failures of his kind. Soon, Lei Shen desired answers his intellect and reason could no longer provide. He set off in search of the Mogu's long-absent master, High Keeper Ra. In recent centuries, the High Keeper had become known as Ra Den, meaning Master Ra in the new Mogu tongue. Few of Lei Shen's kind even believed he still lived. Why would their ancient creator have allowed them to suffer from the curse of flesh? Lei Shen believed Ra Den had a plan, a master purpose, and that the current trials of the Mogu were merely a test. Perhaps it was even the will of the Titans themselves. After all, Ra Den was their living instrument. After years of searching, Lei Shen located the entrance to the hidden vaults beneath the land north of the Veil, sacred chambers that the Mogu had all but forgotten due to their ceaseless warring. There he found the High Keeper, sitting quietly in the stillness beneath the earth. Ra Den showed no reaction to the young Mogu's intrusion. The High Keeper said nothing, even as Lei Shen began to ask him questions about the Mogu's true purpose. Days and weeks passed, and Lei Shen grew frustrated with his master's silence. Finally, the Mogu realized that Ra was not contemplating some subtle plan, was not engrossed in the work of the Titans. The High Keeper had simply given up. The suffering of the Mogu had been the result of an absentee master and nothing more. Lei Shen unleashed his anger on Ra, accusing him of abandoning the Titans and their purpose. His harsh words roused the High Keeper from his stupor. Ra took Lei Shen to the nearby Thundering Mountain, where unending storms roared and split the heavens. No Mogu had dared scale its slopes before, for the mountain was believed to be a forbidden place. Inside a massive, ornate vault, Ra Den summoned the lingering power of Aman'Thul and showed Lei Shen the answers he wanted. The Titans of the Pantheon were dead, murdered by one of their own. Their final hope was the world Azeroth itself, but it was already infested with creatures of the void. The High Keeper had assumed that his knowledge would shatter Lei Shen's soul as it had his own. Yet the Mogu reacted in a way Ra Den never expected. Lei Shen decided that if his master had no interest in continuing the Titan's purpose, he would do it himself. Without warning, he struck out and incapacitated Ra Den. Lei Shen then bound the mighty being in enchanted iron bands. He stole not only Ra Den's incredible power, but also the contained power of Aman'Thul. Might beyond understanding flooded through Lei Shen's soul. He imprisoned Ra Den within the Thundering Mountain, ignoring the High Keeper's rage and confusion at the betrayal. When Lei Shen descended the mountain and met with his remaining armsmen, they were in awe of him. Rumors of Lei Shen's newfound might spread among the Mogu clans. Some believed he had torn out the heart of a god and eaten it. A few claimed he had harnessed the ancient powers of the Veil itself. Still, others whispered that he was a Titan reborn. Yet all of the stories had one fact in common. This Thunder King had demanded that all Mogu bow before him. He claimed the birthright of the Titans, and he would destroy all those who refused to yield to his will. Thereafter, Lei Shen set out to unify the Mogu and forge them a new destiny as the masters of Azeroth and guardians of its world soul. The petty squabbling and warfare that had plagued their kind would no longer be tolerated. With lightning and thunder at his command, Lei Shen crushed all opposition. The fortunate ones were killed quickly. The unfortunate ones were kept in chains for centuries. Initially, most of the Mogu rallied to him out of fear, but his miracles soon inspired devotion. The Thunder King had mastered the enchanted tools of the Keepers. One of these was the engine of 𝑺𝒐𝒄𝒊𝒂𝒍, a powerful device that Lei Shen had discovered beneath the land north of the Veil. Using this extraordinary machine, the Mogu began shaping flesh and stone into new living creatures. They even found a way to reverse the curse of flesh among themselves. Under Lei Shen, a period of prosperity and brutality gripped the Veil. For the Mogu, it was the beginning of a glorious new empire. Yet for the region's other races, it marked the start of an age of tyranny. The Two Empires. As Lei Shen's empire expanded in scope and power, he soon regarded all living creatures within his domain as his servants. The curse of flesh was a weakness, he reasoned, and although not all of the Mogu might ever fully be cleansed of the flaw, other beings of flesh would always be beneath them. The Thunder King began a campaign of enslavement in the lands surrounding the Veil. The wise Jinyu had established a small empire of their own. Though they fought valiantly, the Jinyu ultimately crumbled before the might of Lei Shen. The Mogu sacked their towns and left their entire civilization in ruins. Upon learning of the Jinyu's fate, the Pandaren fled to Kunlai Summit, north of the Veil. There, they sought the protection of Zuen, the White Tiger. When Lei Shen brought his armies to the foothills, he challenged Zuen to a duel that would decide the fate of the Pandaren. Zuen accepted, and for many days, the great battle between the White Tiger and the Thunder King shook the skies over Kunlai. In the end, Zuen could not match Lei Shen's stolen Titan power. Lei Shen chained Zuen near the peak of the mount, forcing the August Celestial to watch as the Mogu bound the Pandaren to slavery. Fearing that the Pandaren's peaceful philosophies would undermine his rule, Lei Shen forbade them from learning how to read or write, or even how to speak any language other than the Mogu tongue. To disobey was to be killed in slow, brutal fashion. The Mogu forged their greatest palaces and monuments with the blood and sweat of their subjugated races. Soon, the empire boasted a unified language, an established system of weights and measurements, and the first set of written laws in Azeroth, brutal codes that enshrined the Mogu's place above the other creatures. Lei Shen also forced his slaves to act as soldiers, or to expand the crude fortification once used to defend the Veil from the Mantid. Thus was born the Serpent's Spine, a massive stone wall separating the Mogu from the insectoid lands. When existing slaves perished or proved inefficient, Lei Shen shaped new ones with the power of the engine of 𝑺𝒐𝒄𝒊𝒂𝒍. This led to the creation of myriad beings, such as the diminutive yet resilient Grumels and the barbaric reptilian Sorok. The Mogu Empire quickly drew notice from the other civilizations on Azeroth. The Zandalari trolls, in particular, were amazed at the otherworldly powers wielded by the Thunder King. One of the Zandalari's leaders, a revered high priest named Zulathra, saw in the Mogu a golden opportunity. He and a retinue of trolls journeyed to the Thunder King's domain with a simple proposition. The Mogu might hold the power of this world, but the trolls held the knowledge of the land. The two empires would make each other great and teach each other their secrets. Once they were allied, nothing on Azeroth would dare oppose them. The offer intrigued Lei Shen. For the first time, he had met other living creatures who sought to master their environment rather than live in peace with it. The Mogu rarely ventured far from their lands. Superstitions and the deep-seated duty of protecting the Veil still influenced their actions. They could explore the world from a position of ignorance, or they could ally with the trolls and learn its mysteries quickly. In truth, both leaders plotted betrayal. 𝒂𝒑𝒂𝒂 believed the Zandalari could steal Lei Shen's godlike powers once they learned the Mogu's secrets, and the Thunder King schemed to enslave the Zandalari the moment they ceased being useful. Yet they kept their plans concealed, even from their own people, and publicly brokered an agreement. In exchange for the Zandalari's knowledge, the Mogu would train them in the ways of arcane magic. They also promised the Zandalari a swath of fertile land near the Veil. Lei Shen even made a secret agreement with 𝒂𝒑𝒂𝒂. The Thunder King had devised a method to fully revive his spirit if he was ever killed, but he did not trust his own servants with such knowledge. The Mogu were a power-hungry people, and they would likely try to claim the empire for themselves if Lei Shen fell. Only the Zandalari would hold the key for resurrecting Lei Shen. Without him, the trolls knew they would never fully learn the secrets of the arcane, nor would they be able to claim his awesome power. Though both leaders continued scheming, their betrayals would never come to fruition. Indeed, they found each other to be invaluable allies, and their pact endured for many years. Thunder Falls. While Lei Shen consolidated his empire, the Tol'vir guarding Uldum struggled to endure the curse of flesh. The malady had spread throughout their ranks, slowly weakening the Titan-Forged. All the while, the Tol'vir waited patiently for word from High Keeper Ra or his Mogu servants in the east. Eventually, the Tol'vir received a summons from a Mogu leader calling himself the Thunder King. They had heard nothing about the rise of the Mogu Empire. Curious, the Tol'vir dispatched ambassadors to the east. When they reached the edges of the Thunder King's domain, they were stunned to see how advanced their Mogu cousins had become. In some instances, the Mogu had even managed to reverse the curse of flesh. Lei Shen warmly greeted the Tol'vir and showed them the wonders of his empire, from the immense serpent spine wall to the gilded imperial palaces of the Veil. The Tol'vir were shocked at the deplorable treatment of the mortal races that had been enslaved by the Mogu. Even so, the Tol'vir were not stirred to action. Their prime concern was the protection of the Keeper-wrought machineries in Uldum. The Thunder King wholeheartedly agreed. The works of the Keepers, such as the Forge of Origination in Uldum, were of utmost importance, and so Lei Shen announced he was claiming them as part of his empire. He revealed that he had defeated Ra-Den and taken his power. Therefore, Lei Shen claimed that he now held dominion over the Keeper's instruments. With the Engine of Nalaksha and the Forge of Origination at his command, he could remake Azeroth as he saw fit. As fellow Titan-Forged, the Tol'vir would ascend to a place of honor in the Mogu Empire, but Lei Shen would be at its head, now and forever. Upon learning that Lei Shen had betrayed High Keeper Ra, the Tol'vir grew furious. They refused the Thunder King's offer, vowing never to serve a traitor, and stormed out of his tyrannical empire. Lei Shen allowed the ambassadors to leave, but warned them he would take what he wanted by force. Their armies could not possibly stand against his. So confident was the Thunder King that he invited 𝒂𝒑𝒂𝒂 to witness what he claimed would be the Mogu Empire's greatest victory yet. The elderly Zandalari leader agreed. Lei Shen had artificially extended the troll's life, but once all the Keeper's works were under Mogu control, they would unlock the secrets of immortality. Almost all the high-ranking Zandalari leaders accompanied Zalathra as an honor guard, also expecting to return to their capital of Zuldazar with the gift of eternal life. Lei Shen led his Mogu host and the trolls to the west. The Zandalari had heard tales of the lands near Uldum, but they had never seen them with their own eyes. Pristine lakes and waterfalls dotted the region's lush jungles. It was a paradise, teeming with undiscovered life and wonders as far as the eye could see. The full might of Lei Shen's empire trampled over the land, stopping just short of the monolithic pyramids that composed the Keeper's bastion of Uldum. Only a small group of Tol'vir emerged from the fortress to resist the Mogu. Lei Shen mocked their numbers, for he knew that he alone could crush them. Indeed, the Tol'vir had known that defeating the Thunder King's forces in battle was impossible. As Lei Shen had marched toward Uldum, the Titan Forged had prepared a final defense. The Forge of Origination locked beneath the fortress. Rather than using it to its full potential, which would eradicate all life on Azeroth, the Tol'vir had configured the Forge of Origination to scour only the nearby land. As Lei Shen led the charge, gloating in his impending victory, the Tol'vir activated the weapon. Deep within the earth, the device rumbled to life. The earth heaved and buckled as waves of force erupted from Uldum, bathing the surrounding land in the energies of uncreation. The Tol'vir defenders and nearly every other creature on the surface of Uldum that day died instantly. Creatures all across Kalimdor witnessed the flash on the southern horizon. When it subsided, Lei Shen and his allies were no more. The unleashed power had also purged the area around Uldum of almost all life, leaving only a cracked and barren desert behind. Pockets of plant and animal life would slowly return over the millennia, but the vast jungle would never fully regain its vibrancy. The surviving Tol'vir within Uldum worked to ensure that no one would ever again attempt to claim such power. They shrouded the few mountain passes that led into the region with magic. In doing so, the Tol'vir effectively sealed Uldum off from the eyes of mortals. The Tol'vir's noble sacrifice had kept the Forge of Origination out of Lei Shen's hands and prevented any other Mogu emperor from daring to follow in his footsteps. The death of Lei Shen and the upper caste of the Zandalari left massive power vacuums in both empires. Before the Tol'vir shrouded Uldum in their grand illusion, a handful of Thunder King loyalists recovered Lei Shen's corpse from the region. They brought it back to the Empire and enshrined it within the Tomb of Conquerors. Yet, with most of the Zandalari leadership dead, there was no one to revive the Thunder King. A succession of emperors followed Lei Shen, but none would ever wield so much power as he had. The Zandalari, too, spent generations attempting to recover from the losses at Uldum. The catastrophic event had struck a mortal blow to both empires. Neither would ever regain its former glory. And in time, both would crumble and fall. The Pandaren Revolution, 12,000 years before the Dark Portal. The Thunder King's death weakened the Mogu, but their civilization continued lording over the Vale. The Empire's slaves suffered greatly under Lei Shen's barbarous successors, each ruler seemingly crueler than the last. The final Mogu emperor, Lao Fei, earned the title slave binder early in his tenure. He lived a life of decadence, confident that his supply of cowed slaves would never diminish. To earn their compliance, Lao Fei would tear apart slave families for even mild transgressions. Parents were separated, children were dispatched to the serpent's spine to die as fodder before the Mantid swarm. It was this very fate that befell the family of a Pandaren brewmaster named Kang. His son was sent to the Mantid, and his wife died trying to stop it. After the Mogu left his home and his life in ruins, Kang nearly succumbed to despair. But soon his thoughts circled around a particular question. Why? Why did the Mogu inflict such pain? Kang meditated on the slavery of his people, and he reached a radical conclusion. The extreme cruelty towards slaves was not a sign of the Mogu's strength. It was a symptom of their weakness. They had grown dependent on their servants. Without them, they were nothing. Kang devoted his life to exposing the Mogu's vulnerability. Apart from those who were sent to defend the serpent's spine, no slave was ever permitted to touch a weapon, a crime punishable by death. Thus, Kang taught himself to use his own body as one. To elude the ever-watchful eyes of the Mogu, he learned to disguise his attacks as an artistic dance. When he had finally mastered his techniques, he challenged his fellow slaves to strike him. None could. His dancing, his flowing movements, kept him free of harm. The slaves begged Kang to teach them how to fight unarmed. Kang did, and the word of this strange new combat method spread quickly among the oppressed peoples of the Mogu Empire. Hundreds of slaves adopted Kang's teachings and devoted themselves to learning this newfound art, known thereafter as the Way of the Monk. When rumors of the movement reached the Mogu ears, Kang relocated his followers to Kunlai Summit, fully aware that his apprentices were not yet strong enough to topple their oppressors. In secret, the Pandaren rebels built a monastery among the wind-lashed peaks and began to further train themselves as instruments of justice. It was at Kunlai Summit that Kang found something utterly unexpected, the prison of Zuen, the White Tiger. Kang communed often with the August Celestial, learning the secrets of inner strength that lay within every heart. The Pandaren master passed along Zuen's wisdom to his followers. At last, the Pandaren monks were ready to fight. Their first major victory came at the Mogu Shan Vaults, the sacred chambers that housed the engine of Nalaksha. There, the rebels successfully drove the Mogu away from the source of their flesh-shaping power. The Pandaren's devastating attack prevented the Mogu from creating any new twisted soldiers. This single victory not only heartened the Pandaren, but also drew other races to the rebellion. The Hosen, the Jinyu, the Grumels, and a burly race of bovine creatures called the Yaungol all joined the effort to topple the Mogu Empire. Bit by bit, the revolution grew. Kang was right. The Mogu had grown too reliant on their slaves, and as more rebelled, the empire fell into chaos. The Grumels, masters of communication and trade, disrupted Mogu supply lines. The mighty Yaungol led raiding parties to wreak havoc in the northwest. The wily Hosen dug tunnels to infiltrate the mightiest Mogu strongholds. The mystic Jinyu communed with the waters of the land to glean the future, telling Kang's forces where to strike and when to run. Eventually, Lao Fei's forces retreated into the Vale of Eternal Blossoms, the royal seat of the Mogu Empire. Kang knew the enchanted land could sustain them for as long as they desired. Thus, to defeat the Mogu, the rebels needed to expose themselves and launch an attack. Kang did not hesitate to do so. He personally led the charge, striking deep into the Vale. He fought Lao Fei hand-to-hand and defeated him, but the Pandaren sustained mortal wounds in return. The slave binder and the former slave died together. Flushed with victory, some of the freed slaves considered seeking revenge against the surviving Mogu, butchering them as they had butchered their vassals for millennia. Yet one of Kang's most promising students calmed their bloodlust. As a secretive keeper of Pandaren history, the pupil's Song had memorized many of Master Kang's philosophies and tales. Song retold Kang's stories again and again to the liberated slaves, reminding them about his commitment to true justice, not revenge. He walked from one end of the fallen empire to the other for the rest of his life, sharing Kang's wisdom and urging all creatures to find emotional balance within themselves. As Song's story spread, others began to follow in his footsteps. More and more Pandaren traveled the land, telling stories and encouraging inner peace in all they met. These lore walkers, as they would eventually be named, became not only skilled storytellers, but also conflict mediators, diffusing tense situations with allegories and parables that would help all sides see reason and find a middle ground. So began a time of peace and prosperity in and around the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. The Pandaren, along with the other races that called the region home, flourished. A new empire, one built on the principles of justice, wisdom, and benevolence, emerged to watch over the war-torn land. Yaungol Migration. When the Mogu Empire was at its height, an intelligent bovine race known as the Yaungol roamed the grassy plains of central Kalimdor. These burly creatures lived in harmony with nature, following the guidance of the wise demigod Cenarius. Unlike many of the other wild gods, Cenarius was more humanoid in appearance. The majestic half-stag, draped in a cloak of flowers and vines, often walked among the nomadic Yaungol. He taught these creatures the secrets of the wilds, and he delighted in watching them flourish. Eventually, the Yaungol grew weary of sharing hunting grounds with the nearby trolls and decided to seek new lands. Although their beloved demigod Cenarius urged them to stay and make peace, they set out to the south. They hunted and foraged for food all the way to the edge of the Mogu Empire. The emperor of the time, Chiang the Merciless, found the Yaungol and their immense physical strength fascinating. He ordered his flesh shapers to capture the nomads and transform them into even mightier and more intelligent servants, while at the same time tempering their more savage instincts. The Yaungol suffered under the tyranny of Mogu oppression for generations, until they rose up alongside the other slaves to overthrow their cruel masters. Although the Yaungol gained their freedom, they had lost much. Their strong oral storytelling tradition had all but vanished due to strict Mogu laws that forbade them from discussing their heritage. Much of their rich history had faded away. Some Yaungol clung to the faint memories and incomplete myths of a benevolent demigod who had once watched over them. Others insisted that the Yaungol should abandon all tradition and forge a new destiny by force. The disagreements grew heated and on certain occasions even led to bloodshed. Most Yaungol despised the violence and set out to the north determined to return to a life of hunting and living among the spirits of nature. Some of the more nomadic tribes traveled all the way across the continent, only stopping when they reached the frigid climes near the storm peaks. Other tribes settled in the balmy areas of central Kalimdor and reunited with their ancient benefactor, Cenarius. Returning to their ancestral hunting grounds allowed them to rediscover their old traditions. Those who studied with Cenarius learned the druidic magic of the natural world, while others mastered the arts of wielding shamanic powers. Yet not all Yaungol left the Vale. Those who stayed behind quickly found themselves at odds with the Pandaren and other liberated slaves. The Mogu flesh-shaping had not completely subdued the Yaungol's bold nature, and conflict after conflict ignited over matters of land and resources. Fearing an open war with the former allies, the Yaungol moved west, settling outside the Serpent's Spine. That left them exposed to the Mantid, and every 100 years, the swarm would threaten to exterminate their people. The Mantid Cycle and constant infighting among these Yaungol led to a strong warrior tradition, one that would make them far more savage than the tribes that had gone north. Over the passing of generations, these energies emanating from the Well of Eternity and Keeper-wrought machineries around Kalimdor changed the Yaungol in unique ways. Those near the Vale would keep the name Yaungol, though they grew more warlike than their distant cousins. Those in central Kalimdor, close to the Well of Eternity, would take the name Tauren. The tribes that ventured to the north, near the Forge of Wills, would be called Tonka, and they would adopt to the region's icy terrain. These far-flung groups maintained contact with one another for many years, but when the Great Sundering eventually shattered the world, all connection between the tribes was lost. Zandalari Invasion, 11,900 years before the Dark Portal. The Zandalari had always maintained a distant relationship with the Mogu following Lei Shan's death. Though the trolls found the Mogu's knowledge of arcane magic useful, they loathed the constant intra-clan strife and tense political maneuvering. When it became clear that no Mogu clan would establish total dominance, the Zandalari refrained from pledging their loyalties to any one faction in particular. But they never forgot the promise Lei Shan had made to them. A large plot of land near the Vale of Eternal Blossoms would forever belong to the trolls. When, at long last, the Mogu Empire crumbled, the Zandalari saw an opportunity to take what they believed was rightfully theirs. They did not move immediately. Internal debate raged in the Zandalari capital of Zuldazar about whether the territory should be taken by diplomacy or by force. In the end, it was a descendant of the great high priest Zulathra who made the strongest case. His name was Mengazi, and he knew that the Pandaren would be unlikely to honor the Zandalari's agreement with the Mogu. The former slaves had also overthrown their masters, and as such, they could be strong enough to mount a fierce resistance against the trolls if given time to prepare. To succeed in claiming their land, the trolls would need to strike without warning and with enough force to shatter the Pandaren's will. To this end, the trolls marched south, intent on seizing a fertile region north of the Kunlai summit. The Zandalari stormed the main settlement in the area, a tranquil Pandaren farming village. Imbued with mystic powers and riding atop colossal saurian war mounts, the trolls slaughtered almost every single resident of the settlement. The Zandalari ranks then pushed into the Jade Forest, a dense jungle that had become the heart of the newly established Pandaren Empire. When word of the invasion reached the other Pandaren settlements, panic seized them. No standing army existed to thwart the trolls. In the decades since the Slave Revolution, few had seen the need to carry on the militaristic ways of the Mogu, preferring instead to let all residents live in peace without an overarching authority. The only real fighting force was an order of monks, charged by the Pandaren Emperor to patrol the Serpent's Spine and stand against the periodic Mantid swarms. Though the monks raced from the Serpent's Spine to defend their lands against the trolls, they found themselves hopelessly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The trolls were employing a form of warfare none had ever seen, descending into battle on the backs of reptilian terror wings and giant bats. The Pandaren had no means to counter these ferocious aerial attacks. Ultimately, salvation came from a young Pandaren named Jiang. When she was but a child, she had found a cloud serpent hatchling, alone and badly injured after a terrible storm had destroyed his nest. At the time, the Pandaren regarded the flying cloud serpents as untamable and violent beasts, but Jiang nursed him back to health and befriended him. Those in her village often saw them flying the skies together. As the monks fought a losing battle atop the cliffs of the Jade Forest, Jiang and her serpentine companion Lo swooped down from the clouds. Lo's fury and fire broke the Zandalari ranks, forcing them to retreat. News of the victory spread throughout the empire, and the others followed in Jiang's footsteps. They tamed the powerful cloud serpents, and soon a small army rose to fly into battle at Jiang's side. These brave Pandaren became known as the Order of the Cloud Serpent. The tide of war had turned. The trolls knew there was little they could do to win by conventional means, so 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒏𝒆𝒍 turned to a final tactic, resurrecting the Thunder King, Lei Shen. Lei Shen had granted the Zandalari the secret to his revival, not trusting any of his Mogu underlings to do it for him if he were killed. The trolls knew the Thunder King would have the power to purge the troublesome serpent riders and destroy any army on the ground. A pitched battle erupted near the Tomb of the Conquerors, where Lei Shen's corpse was enshrined. Jiang sacrificed herself in a final desperate attack, killing 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒏𝒆𝒍. The other Zandalari soon broke ranks and fled back to their homeland in shame. Through her heroic act, Jiang had prevented the trolls from resurrecting the terrible Thunder King. There was great celebration throughout the empire, but also mourning over the lives lost, especially Jiang's. For decades after the conflict, Lo was seen circling the skies above the Jade Forest, as though searching for his old friend and rider. The other serpent riders honored Jiang's memory by codifying her teachings. Within the Order of the Cloud Serpent, her tradition of training and befriending the majestic creatures would survive for millennia to come. The Well of Eternity and the Rise of the Night Elves, 15,000 to 10,000 years before the Dark Portal. Before their war with the Aqir, the troll tribes claimed large swaths of Kalimdor. Many of these groups, such as the Gurubashi and the Amani, clashed with each other over hunting grounds and territory. Yet one tribe was unconcerned with these battles for land and power. Known as Dark Trolls, they lived in a network of deep caverns that stretched beneath Mount Hyjal. They abhorred daylight, only emerging from their underground burrows at night. The Dark Trolls' nocturnal habits changed them over time, turning their blue-hued skin into shades of gray. The Dark Trolls cherished their independence from greater troll society, and they largely ignored the activities of the other tribes. Unlike their Gurubashi and Amani cousins, they longed for peaceful connection to the natural world. Dark troll mystics often sought ways to commune with the land and live in harmony with it. Many of these trolls gradually migrated toward the center of Kalimdor. They explored labyrinthine groves at the heart of the continent, crossing paths with the elusive fairy dragons, chimeras, and dryads. In time, the dark trolls also discovered an enormous lake of scintillating energies, a lake they would later know as the Well of Eternity. Mesmerized by their discovery, the dark trolls settled along the Well of Eternity's shores. Over generations, the energies radiating from the lake suffused the trolls' flesh and bones, elevating their forms to match their graceful spirits. They transformed into highly intelligent and virtually immortal beings. These former trolls gradually abandoned their ancient heritage and traditions. The tribe's mystics began worshipping the moon goddess, Illidan, who they believed was bound to the Well of Eternity itself. They claimed that the deity slumbered within the font's depths during the daylight hours. The former trolls also discovered the name Kalimdor and other Titan-forged words from communing with Illidan and investigating strange artifacts scattered around the well's periphery. Influenced by this newfound language, they called themselves Kaldorei, children of the stars, or night elves. The trees, flowers, and woodland creatures silently watched the night elves flourish, whispering news to them of the wild gods of Hyjal. Among them, the demigod Cenarius took a keen interest in these newcomers at the Well of Eternity's shores. The night elves would claim that he was the son of the great white stag Malorn and Illidan herself. Cenarius adored the night elves and believed they had the potential to become great caretakers of nature. He befriended the fledgling race and taught them about the natural world. It was Cenarius's hope that the night elves would strive to live in harmony with the wilds. For many centuries, the night elves did. They built a graceful society around the Well of Eternity. The capital of their small nation was called Illundris, or the Eye of Illidan, and it was founded on the shores of the Font of Power. The night elves also honed their ties with the surrounding woodlands and their myriad inhabitants. Cenarius guided the night elves when necessary, pleased by the wisdom and benevolence that thrummed in their hearts. But in time, many of the night elves yearned for a different life. These individuals became obsessed with unlocking the Well of Eternity's secrets. They rigorously studied the font's arcane energies, becoming learned sorcerers. They harnessed the powers of the arcane lake and constructed wondrous temples and roadways around it. Magic became an inseparable part of life as the night elves reveled in the power at their fingertips. Pushing the boundaries of their intellect became the driving force of their culture. It was during this era of unprecedented growth that the night elves' most prolific leader came to power. Her name was Queen Azshara. Through her unbridled ambition, she would elevate her people to extraordinary new heights and sow the seeds of their destruction. Queen Azshara. Beautiful and wise beyond her years, Queen Azshara embodied the most coveted traits of her people. She indulged in sorcerous pursuits and constructed a breathtaking, bejeweled palace on the shores of the Well of Eternity. There, the most powerful nobles, who became known as the Quel'Dorei, or Highborn, answered to her every beck and call. The Highborn were incredibly gifted and ambitious sorcerers. Some, such as Lady Vaj, served as the queen's adoring and loyal handmaidens. Others, like Lord Xavius, were consulted by Azshara in matters of governance and acted as trusted advisors. But no matter what specific role these highborn played at the Queen's side, all of them occupied the upper echelon of Night Elf society. They believed themselves to be superior to the rest of their race, a fact that drew the ire of the lower-born Night Elves. But such contempt did not extend to Azshara. Although the Queen was born of the highest noble pedigree, Night Elves of every social standing adored her. The Elves were so enamored with their Queen that they renamed their wondrous capital Zin-Azshari, or the glory of Azshara, in her honor. Under Azshara, Night Elf civilization blossomed into a sprawling empire, a dreamscape of gilded spires, vast cities, and other marvels that would not be seen again even in the modern age. Networks of luminescent causeways, limned by silver light of Elune, radiated out to the far corners of Kalimdor. At Azshara's behest, expeditionary forces set out to explore the world and also spread the Empire's borders. They often returned to Zin-Azshari with samples of exotic flora and fauna, and tales of the mythical dragonflights that ruled the roof of the world. The expeditionary forces also founded dozens of outposts and repositories, such as Shandaral in the icy northern forest of Moonsong, Thenrelor in the lush central wilds, later known as the Barrens, and Eldrthalas in the southern jungles of Fairlas. The Queen herself oversaw the building of wondrous new temple to Elune, a sprawling expanse of gem-encrusted bridges and effervescent lakes at the western edge of Kalimdor. Upon its completion, she named the mesmerizing grounds Latharlasal, or Seat of the Sky. Not since the Black Empire in ages past had a territory grown so vast in shape and scope. The immense influence Azshara held over the world and its denizens eclipsed even Lei Shen's wildest dreams of power. There was, however, one location Azshara and her forces avoided, Mount Hyjal. The spirits and demigods who roamed the sylvan forests unsettled the Queen. She knew in her bones that Hyjal was somehow beyond even her influence. It was a place steeped in ancient magic, a wild, untamable, and unchangeable land that stood in stark contrast to her vision of a new Kalimdor. Publicly, Azshara prohibited expansion into Hyjal out of respect for the Night Elves' ancient kinship with the forests. In truth, she despised the mountain and the harmony it represented. Azshara's views on Hyjal were well known to Cenarius. With growing unease, he had watched the Night Elf Empire expand. Year by year, he became increasingly frustrated with the hubris and thoughtless actions of the sorceress highborn. The majority of Night Elf society continued honoring the old ways of revering the wilds. The fact that these folks still lived in harmony with the land warmed Cenarius' heart, but he knew they had no influence over Azshara and her arrogant followers. As time passed, the Night Elves began issuing diplomacy and largely ignored Azeroth's other cultures. Azshara's dogmatic beliefs regarding racial purity seeped into the Night Elves' psyche, creating an atmosphere rife with xenophobia. Only the openly hostile troll nations drew the full attention of the Elves. Small, sporadic battles ignited between the two sides. On every occasion, the trolls buckled before the devastating magics wielded by the Night Elves. Azshara, however, was not interested in conquest. In her eyes, the trolls were a minor nuisance, their battle lust a symptom of primitive and unenlightened minds. Ultimately, the queen struck an accord with the Zandalari tribe, which held immense influence over all other trolls. In exchange for ending troll incursions into Night Elf territory, the Zandalari would be allowed, by Azshara's grace, to keep the sacred Zandalari Mountains south of the Well of Eternity. The trolls begrudgingly agreed, fully aware that they stood no chance against their enemies' arcane powers. This shameful acquiescence fostered the trolls' deep resentment towards the Night Elves, a bitter hatred that would carry on for generations to come. With the trolls no longer a threat, Azshara continued expanding her dominion. Yet even as she did so, she spent more time in the confines of her palace, obsessing over the Well of Eternity and the arcane secrets held within it. She believed that the Night Elves had thus far only tapped a small portion of the Vaunt's power. She pushed the Highborn to plumb the Well of Eternity's depths, to expand their knowledge and reach for new heights of cultural and technological advancement. Their reckless experiments sent torrents of magic crashing through the twisting nether. Like moths to flame, the nether's demonic inhabitants were drawn toward the irresistible source of power. It was only a matter of time before Sargeras and the Burning Legion also took notice. At long last, Sargeras had discovered the location of Azeroth, the fabled world soul. Without delay, he gathered all of his rage, all of his terrible demonic legions, and turned his baleful gaze upon the distant world. All that remained for Sargeras was to find a way to reach Azeroth. War of the Ancients, 10,000 years before the Dark Portal. As the Highborn continued experimenting on the Well of Eternity, a young night elf named Malfurion Stormrage honed his ties to nature. Under the tutelage of the wise Cenarius, he had become the first mortal druid on Azeroth. Malfurion excelled in his studies, and he often spent his days wandering the forests of Hyjal. Cenarius was greatly pleased by Malfurion's progress. He had sensed something special in his student from the very first time the Night Elf spirit explored the Emerald Dream. Cenarius hoped that Malfurion would spread druidism among the Night Elves and help them to return to their harmonious roots. Yet this change would not come to Azshara and her followers. Unbeknownst to greater Night Elf society, the Highborn had begun communing with Sargeras. The fallen Titan hoped to use the sorcerers and their great magic to expedite the Legion's journey to Azeroth. Without a suitable gateway, he knew that traveling to the world would take ages. Much as he had done with the Eridar on Argus, Sargeras reached out to the Highborn and capitalized on their hubris. Lord 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍 was the first of the Highborn to hear Sargeras' call. The power-hungry 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒆 quickly brought Sargeras to Azshara's attention. The fallen Titan promised to grant the Night Elf Queen and her servitors unfathomable power, thereby allowing them to remake Kalimdor into a paradise. Sargeras requested only that Azshara and her followers summon his agents into the world of Azeroth so that they could give the Highborn this power. Enthralled by Sargeras' might, Azshara and her Highborn used the Well of Eternity's energies to bring the Legion's minions into Azeroth. Waves of demonic warriors flooded out from the Queen's palace, murdering every Night Elf in their path, save for the Highborn allies. Led by the likes of Manaroth the Destructor, Aqir the Houndmaster, and Archimonde the Defiler, the Legion stormed across the Night Elf Empire in a tide of death and destruction. Blazing infernals tore through the skies, shattering night elf cities, while thousands of bloodthirsty doomguards and ravenous fellhounds reduced Kalimdor's tranquil woodlands to smoldering green embers. War, the likes of which no mortal empire had ever witnessed, had come to Azeroth. A night elf resistance force, led by a noble named Lord Curtalos Ravencrest, formed to stand against the Legion's furious onslaught. Among these brave defenders were Malfurion, his sorceress twin Illidan, and the beautiful priestess whom both brothers loved dearly, Tyrande Whisperland. Ultimately, these three unlikely heroes would change the fate of Kalimdor forever. Though Ravencrest's forces initially suffered many defeats against the demons, the Night Elves did make gains. Malfurion himself delivered one of the most decisive early blows against the Legion and its highborn allies. From the depths of the Emerald Dream, he unleashed his druidic magics upon Azshara's trusted servant, 𝒆𝒊𝒂𝒐, striking him down. Not only did this act destroy one of the Highborn's most powerful sorcerers, but it also proved the incredible potential of druidic magic to Malfurion's allies. Illidan also became invaluable to the resistance. During one engagement, his courage and mastery of arcane magic allowed him to save Ravencrest's life. For this selfless act, Illidan was appointed the commander's personal sorcerer. He would later go on to lead the host of sorcerers that fought for the Night Elf resistance. For her part, the priestess Tyrande emerged as one of the greatest members of the Sisterhood of Elune. Through her unbreakable faith in the benevolent Elune, she saved countless innocents from the marauding Legion. In time, Tyrande would become the High Priestess of Elune, the revered leader of her sacred sisterhood. Yet despite the bravery with which resistance fought, more and more demons spilled into Azeroth through the Highborn's portals. The Legion also bolstered its numbers with a new breed of demon, born from the denizens of Azeroth itself. The first of these abominations was 𝒆𝒊𝒂𝒐. Sargeras had warped the defeated Highborn's body into a twisted, demonic visage of jagged horns and cloven hooves. This new form became known as a satyr, and it would mark 𝒆𝒊𝒂𝒐 as an eternal servant of the Legion. At Sargeras' bidding, he set out to curse many of his fellow Highborn, transforming them into satyrs as well. As the Legion's numbers swelled and the war progressed, Malfurion realized that the Night Elves could not prevail alone. He convinced Tyrande and Illidan to accompany him to the tranquil Moonglade near Mount Hyjal, where they beseeched Cenarius for aid. The great demigod agreed to rally the mighty wild gods against the Legion, but they were unpredictable beings, unaccustomed to fighting as one. Spurring them to action would take time, a luxury the Night Elves did not have. Deathwing and the Dragon Soul. While Cenarius gathered the wild gods, Malfurion called on the mighty dragon aspects to defend Azeroth. Led by 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 the Lifebinder, the dragons convened at their ancient meeting ground of Wyrmwest Temple to discuss how best to hold back the Legion's invasion. It was during one of these gatherings that Neltharion, the Earth Warder, proposed a solution. He convinced his fellow aspects to sacrifice a portion of their power and infuse it into the Dragon Soul, a singular artifact of his own design. The weapon, he claimed, would focus their powers and scour the Legion from the face of Azeroth. Unbeknownst to the other aspects, Neltharion had fallen prey to the whispers of the old gods. Over the ages, the vile entity's influence had tainted the bedrock surrounding the underground prisons. Neltharion's innate ties to the earth made him uniquely susceptible to this evil. Darkness had gradually pervaded the aspect's once great heart. His descent into torment and madness led him to create the Dragon Soul, although it would later be called by another, more fitting name, the Demon Soul. Amid a furious battle between the Legion and the Night Elf resistance, the 5 dragonflights made their final assault against the Legion. Working in unison with his comrades, Neltharion unleashed the full might of the empowered Dragon Soul and utterly decimated the Legion. Yet just as hope began to swell among the defenders, Neltharion turned the weapon against his own allies, Night Elf and Dragon alike. Neltharion's brutal attack murdered nearly all of the Blue Dragonflight. Though the other dragons attempted to stop him, they were forced to flee. The Night Elves were also horrified and awestruck by the sudden betrayal. Eventually, they too retreated from the battlefield to escape Neltharion's wrath. As the Dragon Soul's energies flooded through him, Neltharion's body began tearing apart. A raw power like the seething heart of a volcano engulfed his soul. Smoldering fissures wrenched across Neltharion's scaly hide. From these wounds, geysers of white-hot fire and magma burst forth. With a howl of rage, Neltharion finally withdrew from the engagement and disappeared into the skies. Though Neltharion's assault was short-lived, it had changed the world forever. Single-handedly, he had shattered the unity of the power of the great dragonflights. They would never be the same again. Malygos, leader of the Blue Dragonflight, would suffer far more than any other aspect. On seeing his followers die, he was driven mad with grief that would linger for thousands and thousands of years. Henceforth, Neltharion would be known as Deathwing. His treachery would curse his own black dragonflight to a life of fear and seclusion. In the coming ages, they would find themselves hunted to the brink of extinction by the other flights due to Deathwing's unforgivable betrayal. Illidan's betrayal. Deathwing's betrayal struck a terrible blow to the Night Elves' morale. And worse, Illidan had mysteriously vanished from their ranks. Many Night Elves feared for his life, but none of them could have imagined that the talented sorcerer had actually abandoned the resistance. Illidan's decision to strike out on his own stemmed from his relationship with 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒏𝒆𝒍. The sorcerer had always lived in his brother's shadow. Although Illidan had also studied under Cenarius, he had lacked the patience to master druidism and instead had pursued arcane magic. Throughout the war, Illidan was driven by a fervent determination to rise above his brother and become a hero for his people. Yet time and time again, 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍's deeds eclipsed Illidan's own. This was no more apparent and no more painful than in the sorcerer's desire to win the heart of Tyrande Whisperwind. When Illidan finally summoned the courage to profess his love for her, the priestess rejected him. Illidan took this as a sign that Tyrande intended to choose 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍 as her mate. In the wake of this bitter rejection, dark thoughts plagued Illidan. Unbeknownst to the sorcerer, the satyr Xavius was subtly twisting his mind and fanning the flames of despair. Illidan's mounting discontent ultimately led him to break from the Night Elf resistance. He set out to join the Legion, hoping to gain power unimaginable to any Night Elf. Once he did so, Illidan believed he would finally transcend Malfurion and prove to the world that he was capable of greatness. Against all odds, Illidan secured an audience with Sargeras himself. His plan to steal the potent dragon soul intrigued the fallen titan. So pleased was Sargeras that he granted Illidan exceptional power. He scarred the Night Elf's body with fell tattoos and burned out his eyes, setting the hollows alight with otherworldly fire. Although excruciatingly painful, the final act gave Illidan the ability to see myriad forms of magic. The newly empowered Illidan immediately set out to steal the dragon soul. During the course of this perilous quest, the wayward Night Elf would stumble across Deathwing and witness the aspect's ravaged and tormented form. To hold his broken body together, Deathwing had resorted to bolting adamantium plates to his spine. Ultimately, Illidan secured the dragon soul and delivered the artifact to the waiting Highborn. They immediately used the weapon for the next phase of their plans. The dragon soul would prove vital to creating a massive gateway within the heart of the Well of Eternity. A gateway through which Sargeras himself could enter the world of Azeroth. Illidan would later claim that his actions were for a noble cause, that he had joined the Legion to learn more about the demons and find a means to destroy them. Nonetheless, his foolhardy quest for greatness would haunt him like a specter, tarnishing his reputation forever after. Suramar and the Pillars of Creation. As battles raged across central Kalimdor, one group of Azshara's servants grew increasingly concerned for their own future. This small sect of highborn sorcerers acted as an extension of the Queen's will. From their headquarters in Suramar, they engaged in covert activities aimed at securing Azshara's rule and strengthening the empire. Of the many duties that these highborn performed, they excelled at hunting down and acquiring artifacts of great power. Most of these relics were stored in the Vault of Antiquities, a vast repository located in Suramar. Among the greatest archaeological discoveries made by this group of highborn were the long-lost Pillars of Creation, an extraordinary set of relics that ancient keepers had used to shape and order Azeroth in ages past. Though Suramar's elite highborn had pledged their undying loyalty to Azshara, their views on the Queen began to shift as the war dragged on. The group's leader, Grand Magistrix Elisande, feared that the Legion did not have the highborn's best interest in mind. The monstrous demons had already destroyed much of the Night Elf's glorious empire and poisoned the surrounding land with their fell magics. Elisande's distrust of the Legion only deepened when she discovered that demons were planning to transform Suramar into a new staging ground for the war. Legion agents had begun forming a gateway to the twisting nether within the city's most prominent structure, the Temple of Elune. Once open, this portal would allow the Legion's reinforcements to storm into Azeroth and crush the Night Elf resistance on a second front. Yet Elisande thought that such a portal would likely destroy Suramar and everyone who dwelled within. Thus, the Grand Magistrix and her followers formed a plan to sabotage the Legion's efforts. They severed their ties with the other highborn and moved to seal the demon's new portal. To do so, Elisande and her allies sought out the potent artifacts they had gathered over the years. In particular, they knew that the Pillars of Creation possessed the raw power that they would need to neutralize the Legion's portal. With these artifacts in hand, Elisande and her Highborn led an assault against the demons in Suramar. Just as the Legion's new portal began roaring to life, the sorcerers channeled their magic through the Pillars of Creation. They wove a great spell that closed the Howling Gateway and locked it with a set of unbreakable seals. Though they had thwarted the attempt to create a new portal, the rebellious Highborn had no plans to join the Night Elf resistance and continue fighting the Legion. Fearing calamity, Elisande and her followers worked to fortify their holdings in Suramar. They harnessed the Eye of Aman'Thul, one of the Pillars of Creation, to create an immense font of arcane magic, known as the Night Well. This source of power would nourish the sorcerers and protect them from future threats. In the millennia to come, the font would also change Elisande and her allies, transforming them into a new race called the Nightborn. The fall of Zin-Azshari and the sundering of the world. Despite a series of crushing defeats, hope yet lingered among the Night Elf resistance. A brave new leader, Jarad Shadowsong, had assumed the mantle of command. Unlike his predecessors, he was not born of noble blood. A fierce combatant and brilliant strategist, Jarad went to great lengths to strengthen the resistance. He stripped away the Night Elf's inherent xenophobia and invited many of Azeroth's other races, such as the Earthen, Tauren, and mighty Furbolgs, into the Night Elf army. The resistance also found allies among their highborn enemies. A group of sorcerers led by Dathramar Sunstrider had come to realize that their allegiance to demons would bring ruin to Azeroth. These highborn abandoned Azshara and pledged their lives to the resistance. Even the wild gods finally emerged from the forests at Cenarius' goading, prepared to fight tooth and claw for the resistance. The forests trembled as these gargantuan beings marched down from the slopes of Hyjal. Each of the wild gods possessed strength and power unlike anything the demons had yet faced. Some, such as the white wolf Goldrin, dwarfed even the largest demons in size. With the wild gods came a host of other fey creatures, including the woodland dryads and many-headed chimeras. Even the elusive treants, mighty tree folk imbued with great wisdom and strength, emerged to fight the demons. Under Shadowsong, the combined army launched a desperate assault against Zin-Azshari itself. The resistance stormed the broken capital and clashed with the Legion's seemingly numberless ranks. The cost was horrific. Thousands upon thousands of demons fell, but so too did many of Azeroth's mighty defenders. The Legion's bloodletting warriors even overwhelmed a number of the wild gods. One by one, these primordial creatures succumbed to the poison black blades and fell powers wielded by the demons. With each death, the forests atop Hyjal shivered, and the winds howled in sorrow. As the battle continued, Malfurion and Tyrande journeyed to the Well of Eternity's shores with a small elite force. They hoped to reclaim Dragonsoul and prevent the Legion from using its powers. Malfurion and his allies were soon joined by Illidan, who claimed his previous allegiance to the Highborn and the Legion had merely been a ruse to learn of their ways. Although Malfurion remained deeply suspicious of his brother, a much greater threat consumed his attention. He discovered that the Well of Eternity had become a colossal portal, a direct gateway for Sargeras himself to enter Azeroth. Malfurion then realized that no standing army, no matter how vast, could withstand the terrible might of Sargeras. Victory, he determined, could only be achieved by destroying the Well of Eternity itself. While such an act was unthinkable, the Well of Eternity was the Legion's umbilical link to the physical world. Malfurion knew that destroying the Font of Power would spell the end of Night Elf civilization as he knew it, but it was the only chance of saving the world. After reclaiming the Dragon Soul, Malfurion and his companions infiltrated Azshara's palace. They discovered that many of the Highborn were in the midst of weaving a spell to strengthen the portal within the Well of Eternity. In a desperate attempt to throw their magic out of alignment, Malfurion drew on the potent energies of the Dragon Soul and lashed out at his enemies. The great druid conjured a colossal thunderstorm that devoured the skies over the broken palace. The tempest-battered Zin-Azshari, with ferocious winds and a barrage of lightning strikes, decimating the demons and Highborn within the city. Just as Malfurion had hoped, his efforts to disrupt the Highborn and their enormous gateway worked. As Sargeras prepared to emerge from the portal, the Highborn's spellwork unraveled, and an unstable vortex of arcane energies ignited within the Well of Eternity. The font buckled in upon itself. In that moment, Sargeras was ripped back into the twisting nether. Volatile energies whipped out from the collapsing Well of Eternity, hurling most of the Legion's ranks into the nether as well. As their roars of fury echoed across the nether, massive earthquakes began rupturing the crust of Azeroth. Malfurion and the Night Elf resistance had won, but they had no time to savor victory. The world itself was coming apart beneath their feet. En masse, the Night Elves scrambled to put distance between themselves and the crumbling Well of Eternity. The font completed its collapse, igniting a cataclysmic explosion that blotted out the skies. The howling ocean surged in to fill the void left by the explosion, devouring the ruins of Zin-Azshari. When the apocalyptic earthquakes finally ceased, the surviving Night Elves saw that their world had been torn asunder. The Well of Eternity's destruction had shattered nearly 80% of Kalimdor's landmass, leaving only a handful of separate continents and small archipelagos. A tumultuous storm of energies, known as the Maelstrom, had engulfed the Well of Eternity itself. Ever after, the constantly spinning vortex would stand as a reminder of the terrible cost of the war. For the Night Elves and all other living creatures on Azeroth, the world had changed forever. The Burdens of Shaohao, 10,000 years before the Dark Portal. The Sundering decimated life across the face of Azeroth, but one secluded region of southern Kalimdor miraculously escaped destruction: Pandaria. For centuries, a succession of peaceful emperors had ruled over the mysterious land. Prior to the Burning Legion's invasion, a new Pandaren ruler had taken the throne, brimming with confidence and hope about his future. His name was Shaohao, and although he did not know it at the time, his reign would mark the beginning of a new chapter in Pandaria's history. As was tradition among new emperors, Shaohao consulted a mystic Jinyu water speaker to glean knowledge of what the future held. The news he heard was dire. The Jinyu saw a horrific vision of ravenous demons, kingdoms engulfed in sickly green fire, and the land itself howling in pain and torment. Plagued with uncertainty, Shaohao went to see the legendary August Celestials and his great friend the Monkey King in order to make sense of the terrible vision. With their help, the Emperor expelled the dark emotions that troubled his heart, his doubt, despair, fear, anger, hatred, and violence. As he did so, these negative traits took on a physical form. They manifested into powerful spiritual entities known as the Sha. One by one, Shaohao used his wisdom to battle these Sha and lock them away deep beneath Pandaria. There they would remain, festering beneath the earth. To stand watch over these imprisoned Sha, Shaohao also founded the Shadow Pen, an elite order of highly trained Pandaren soldiers. Brimming with newfound confidence and purpose, Shaohao set out to spare Pandaria from the sundering that was to come. He planned to do so by separating his land from the rest of Kalimdor. The Emperor would perform his grand task in the heart of Pandaria, the sacred Vale of Eternal Blossoms. In the Vale, Shaohao focused his powers to sever his empire from Kalimdor. Yet, try as he might, he could not succeed. His doubts and fears returned. Across Pandaria, the imprisoned Sha stirred to life and feasted on the Emperor's uncertainties. As the Legion's fell magics set the heavens alight, Shaohao desperately called upon the aid of the wisest August Celestial, the Jade Serpent. She appeared in the roiling skies and told Shaohao that Pandaria was more than just his empire. Everything in Pandaria was connected. Everything in Pandaria was one. It was then that Shaohao understood the Jade Serpent's advice. To save his land, he would need to become one with it. Despite his dream of living a long and prosperous life, he knew it was not to be. With his mind clear and his heart set on the task ahead, Shaohao merged his spirit with the land itself and forced it to break away from the rest of Kalimdor. His very essence shrouded Pandaria in a thick mist that would hide it from the outside world and protect it from the terrible sundering. For the next 10,000 years, Pandaria would remain hidden, and it faded into legend.